Forget the hype for a moment. The real war in Detroit's muscle car era wasn't fought with horsepower numbers or magazine covers. It was fought in the back of cars, where torque met pavement and weaker designs exploded trying. Ford spent the 1960s bragging about their 9-inch rear end. GM didn't argue. They didn't need to. They just went to the drawing board and built something that did everything Ford's did, only lighter, stronger, and more efficient. They called it the 12-bolt, and for nearly 6 decades, it's been the rear end that separates talkers from doers. This is the story of the axle that powered more quarter-mile records, more pro-street builds, and more Saturday Night Legends than any other piece of hardware in automotive history. This is the axle that made Ford nervous. This is the GM 12-bolt. If you love uncovering these hidden gems of muscle car history, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and drop a comment about your favorite rear-end swap. We might feature it in a future video. Let's drop the hammer. The birth of calculated revenge. The year was 1965. Muscle car warfare was heating up, and General Motors had a problem. Actually, they had several problems. Their 10-bolt rear end was getting the snot kicked out of it by big block torque. The aftermarket was screaming for something tougher, and over in Dearborn, Ford was making a lot of noise about their new 9-inch rear end, claiming it was the toughest thing on 4 wheels. GM's response? The 12-bolt. And right out of the gate, they did something Ford didn't. They made it lighter, more efficient, and just as strong. While Ford's 9-inch was tipping the scales like a heavyweight boxer, the GM 12-bolt came in lean and mean, saving rotational mass and putting more power to the pavement. Here's why it mattered. The engineering was brilliant, almost suspiciously so. An 8.87 5-inch ring gear, 12 bolts holding the ring gear to the carrier instead of 10. A 1.63-inch diameter axle shaft that laughed at wheel hop. And here's the kicker. They designed it with a drop-out third member, just like Ford's 9-inch. Gear swaps? Simple. Trackside repairs? Done in minutes. GM took Ford's best idea and refined it. But they didn't stop there. GM did something Ford never could. They made the 12-bolt fit in everything. Chevelles, Camaros, Novas, El Caminos, Corvettes, even trucks. One rear end, infinite applications. While Ford was juggling multiple rear-end designs across their lineup, GM said, "Here's your axle, now go win races." And win they did. The 12-bolt first showed up in 1965 Chevelle, and by 1966, it was standard equipment behind any big block worth its salt. Those early drag racers didn't need a manual to know what they had. One weekend at the Strip, and the word was out, the 12-bolt was the real deal. Some whispered it wasn't just good engineering. It was corporate warfare, disguised as a parts bin component. Engineering that doesn't break, just wins. There's a mechanical secret buried in the 12-bolt's design that Detroit drag racers discovered before GM ever advertised it. Those 12 bolts weren't just decoration. They were warfare. Let's talk about why the 12-bolt became legendary. And it starts with those 12 bolts. More fasteners means more clamping force. More clamping force means the ring gear stays exactly where it's supposed to be, even when you're launching at 5,000 RPM with slicks trying to tear everything apart. The carrier design was pure genius. GM used a 2-piece carrier case that was both strong and serviceable. Pop the carrier out, change your gears, and you're back in business. No special tools. No PhD required. Just good, honest engineering that mechanics actually appreciated. Those 1.63-inch axle shafts deserve their own moment. Ford's 9-inch? They used 1.31-inch shafts in most applications. Do the math. The GM shaft has significantly more cross-sectional area. More area means more strength. More strength means less twisted axles when you dump the clutch. And the bearings. Oh, the bearings. GM used larger wheel bearings than the 10-bolt, positioned farther outboard for better load distribution. The result? The 12-bolt could handle side loads that would make other rear ends cry for mercy. Cornering forces? Bring it on. Drag launches? All day long. The gear ratio range was spectacular, from economy-minded 2.56 gears all the way up to tire-shredding 5.38 gears. Want to cruise the highway at 1,800 RPM? GM had you covered. Want to hit 60 in first gear? They had that too. One rear end, every possible use case. But here's where it gets interesting, where GM quietly humiliated Ford. The 12-bolt was more efficient than Ford's 9-inch. See, the 9-inch uses a dropout-style third member that sits farther forward, requiring more hypoid offset in the gear mesh. More offset means more friction. More friction means lost horsepower. The 12-bolt's design was more direct, more efficient. Dyno tests showed the 12-bolt could save 3 to 5 horsepower versus a 9-inch. That might not sound like much until you're racing for money, and that's the difference between winning and watching. GM offered the 12-bolt in two main versions. The car version with an 8.875-inch ring gear and the truck version with an 8.5-inch ring gear but beefier components for towing. Both were overbuilt. Both were brilliant. And both are still finding homes in builds today. That's the power of engineering that doesn't need excuses. The junkyard gold and street warfare. Every salvage yard in America hides the same secret. Rows of forgotten muscle, rusted frames, and beneath them, the weapon that powered a generation of street legends. Let's talk about what the 12-bolt actually did on the street, because this is where legends are made. In stock form, a 12-bolt could handle around 400 to 450 horsepower all day long without breaking a sweat. That was more than enough for the average L78396 or L34396 Chevelle rolling off the showroom floor. GM knew their customers were going to beat on these cars, so they built the 12-bolt to take it. But here's where it got wild. Hot rodders quickly discovered the 12-bolt had a secret weapon: headroom. With minimal upgrades, stronger aftermarket axles, a good limited slip, and maybe some billet caps, the 12-bolt could handle 600, 700, even 800 horsepower. Suddenly, the rear end that came in your grandma's Impala could live behind a blown big block. The drag racing community fell in love. Hard. The 12-bolt became the default choice for street strip cars because it was the perfect balance. Strong enough to survive, light enough to not kill your ET, and common enough that you could find one in any junkyard from California to Connecticut. And those junkyards. Oh man. The 12-bolt's ubiquity became its own advantage. Broke a chunk on Friday night? Hit the salvage yard Saturday morning, and you'd have 3 to choose from. Ford 9-inch guys were placing classified ads and waiting weeks. GM guys were back on the road by lunch. The 12-bolt earned its stripes in the pro-street movement of the 80s. Those wild street cars with tubbed rear ends and massive meats out back? Half of them were running 12-bolts. They were light, they were tough, and they looked good painted in Chevy orange or left in natural cast. Chevelle SS owners knew the score. So did Camaro Z 28 guys. Nova Street fighters, El Camino sleepers. They all ran 12 bolts, and they all ran hard. The axle became synonymous with performance. You could tell what a guy was serious about just by looking at the rear-end tag. Meanwhile, Ford guys were doing something they'd never admit. They were swapping 12 bolts into Mustangs. Quietly. Because when you're racing for money, brand loyalty takes a back seat to winning. The rebuild culture and aftermarket explosion. One of the greatest things about the 12-bolt is how rebuild-friendly it became. While Ford 9-inch guys were buying expensive third members and swapping complete assemblies, 12-bolt owners were turning wrenches in their driveways and coming out ahead. The aftermarket exploded. Companies like Strange Engineering, Moser, Yukon Gear, Richmond, and Eaton flooded the market with parts. Want a bulletproof limited slip? Done. Need 35 spline alloy axles rated for 1,200 horsepower? They've got you. Billet steel caps? Nodular iron cases? Pro gear sets cut from the finest materials? All available. All reasonably priced. Gear swaps became a weekend project. Pull the carrier, swap the gears, set your backlash and preload. Button it up. A competent mechanic could do it in a day. Compare that to some of the nightmare rear ends from other manufacturers that required special tools, proprietary procedures, and sacrifice rituals to the automotive gods. The 12-bolt also had ID tags that made identification simple. Stamped right on the axle tube, you could tell the gear ratio, the build date, and what car it came from. No guessing, no confusion, just straightforward, usable information. And because GM used the 12-bolt across so many platforms, parts interchangeability was fantastic. A carrier from a Chevelle would bolt into a Camaro. Axle bearings from a Nova fit an El Camino. It was like GM actually wanted people to work on their own cars. What a concept! The rebuild culture created a knowledge base that's still thriving today. Online forums, YouTube channels, local gearheads who've done 50 12-bolt rebuilds and can spot a problem by sound. That institutional knowledge is worth its weight in gold. This was garage science at its finest. No dyno sheets, no laptops, just a Torx wrench, a dial indicator, and guys who understood that the devil was in the details. The competition and the bitter truth. Let's address the elephant in the room. The Ford 9-inch. Look, the 9-inch is a great rear end. Nobody's denying that. It's stout, it's got fantastic aftermarket support, and it's proven itself in everything from pro stock to rock crawling. Ford guys love it, and for good reason. But here's the thing. The 9-inch is heavy. It's inefficient. And in most applications, it's overkill. If you're building a 2,000 horsepower Pro Mod car, yeah, go ahead and run a 9-inch. But if you're building a street car, a street strip bruiser, or anything that sees actual road duty, the 12-bolt is the smarter choice. The weight difference alone is significant. A 12-bolt is typically 30 to 50 pounds lighter than a comparable 9-inch. That's less unsprung weight, less rotational mass, quicker acceleration, better handling. Real-world advantages that matter every single time you turn the key. And that efficiency thing isn't marketing hype. Dyno proven, the 12-bolt puts more power to the ground. In a world where every horsepower costs money, giving away 3 to 5 horsepower to drivetrain loss is just bad math. Mopar guys had their 8.75-inch rear end, which was also excellent. Tough, gear-friendly, well-supported. But it was heavier than the 12-bolt and not quite as common, making parts hunting more challenging. The Dana 60 deserves mention. Bomb-proof, massive, and found in everything from muscle cars to 3/4-ton trucks. But it's a beast. Heavy, expensive, and honestly, overkill for most street applications. The 12-bolt sat in the sweet spot. Tough enough for serious power, light enough to not kill performance, common enough to support easily. It was the Goldilocks rear end. Not too much, not too little, just right. Modern performance and the legacy that won't die. By the mid-1980s, it looked like the 12 bolts glory days might be over. New rear-end designs were coming. Independent rear suspensions. Different approaches to the same problem. But here's the twist. The 12-bolt never really died. Fast forward to today, and the 12-bolt is still winning races. Modern Pro Street builds, Restomod projects, and LS swapped everything are still using 12 bolts because the fundamentals haven't changed. Strong, light, efficient still matters. The aftermarket has only gotten better. Today, you can buy a fully built 12-bolt from companies like Curry Enterprises or Moser Engineering that'll handle 1,500 horsepower. They're running 40-spline gun-drilled axles, torsion differentials, and billet steel caps. These aren't your grandfather's 12 bolts. These are apex predators. Modern gear sets are cut with CNC precision that would have seemed like science fiction in 1965. Tooth contact is perfect. Noise is minimal. Strength is off the charts. And they're still drop-in compatible with factory housings. The LS swap community has embraced the 12-bolt hard. When you're dropping a 600 horsepower LS3 into a 1970 Chevelle, you need a rear end that can handle it without breaking the budget. The 12-bolt delivers every time. Restomod builders love them because they maintain that classic look while offering modern reliability. You get the vintage aesthetic without the vintage fragility. It's the best of both worlds. And here's something wild. Values are going up. Clean, numbers-matching 12 bolts from desirable applications are fetching real money. What used to be a $200 junkyard score is now a $1,500 core. People recognize quality, and they're willing to pay for it. That's because modern builders combine old-school toughness with new-school knowledge. One Arizona builder keeps a catalog of more than 200 different 12-bolt combinations, each tailored to specific engines and gearing. Want your LS swapped 1969 Camaro to handle 700 horsepower reliably? He's got a spec for that. Want a Restomod that drives like a modern car but looks period correct? There's a 12-bolt combination tuned just for you. The possibilities are endless, and the science is sharper than ever. The rear end that never quit. So what makes the GM 12-bolt special? Is it the engineering? The versatility? The proven track record? The fact that it's been kicking ass for nearly 60 years? Yes, all of that, but it's something else too, something deeper. The 12-bolt represents a philosophy. GM could have built something heavier, more expensive, more complicated. They could have gone the Ford route and made something that worked, but required half a paycheck in parts every time something broke. Instead, they built something brilliant, something efficient, something that regular people could afford, maintain, and rely on. But the 12-bolt's true value isn't just performance. It represents something we've lost in modern car culture. Today, building often means ordering complete assemblies or bolting on prepackaged upgrades. That works, sure, but it's not the same as understanding the system you're building. The 12-bolt teaches you about gear ratios, about bearing preload, about how mechanical systems work together. It forces you to think, not just spend. And when you finally dial in that perfect combination, when everything works exactly how you want it, the satisfaction is something no catalog order can deliver. That rear end under your Chevelle isn't just a hunk of cast iron and gears. It's a promise. A promise that when you nail the throttle, everything's going to hold together. That when you're racing for pink slips, the drivetrain won't let you down. That when you build that dream car in your garage, you won't need a second mortgage to make it bulletproof. The 12-bolt is the rear end that made GM muscle cars possible. It's the unsung hero of 1,000 street races. It's the reason your dad's Camaro could outrun the Ford down the block. And it's still the smart choice today. Ford built the 9-inch, and it's excellent. But GM built the 12-bolt. And brother, that's the difference between building something good and building something perfect. The secret nobody talks about. Wait, there's one more thing, one detail we haven't talked about. The real reason the 12-bolt became legendary. It wasn't the engineering, it wasn't the strength. It was something simpler, more human. The 12-bolt succeeded because GM trusted their customers. They built a rear end that could be modified, upgraded, and personalized. They didn't lock it down with proprietary parts or complicated designs. They gave hot rodders the tools and got out of the way. And those hot rodders? They built a legend that's still winning races 6 decades later. So the next time you think about performance upgrades, don't just picture horsepower numbers or shiny bolt-ons. Remember the 12-bolt. Remember the builders who set backlash and preload because they loved the process, not just the result. They knew the devil was in the details, and they proved that sometimes the simplest solution, perfected over decades, beats anything high-tech. And trust me, this is just the beginning, because next time we're diving into another forgotten performance marvel. You won't want to miss it. So make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with a fellow muscle car fan. And let us know in the comments what hidden performance trick you'd like us to uncover next.